Red, yellow, green, blue, white, purple. Karin, what are you doing? It's all of the colors of the sharpness rainbow. Oh, well, what about special? Special is not a color. Well, somebody's gonna have to tell Gemma. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, welcome to Title Update 2, and welcome Seregios to Monster Hunter Wilds. This absolutely fantastic flagship monster flies high above most other creatures in a number of ways, and one of these is just having some extremely interesting and unique skills on his equipment. Some of it keeps the same spirit of what his skills have done in previous games, but completely changes how it functions. And then the set bonus on his armor is brand spankin' new as well, though I don't recommend spanking Seregios unless you have a good pair of tweezers for your hand. Diamond tips. That said, as is relatively common within Monster Hunter, as cool as the new stuff is and interesting as it always sounds, they've just been incredibly vague about the whole thing. For one thing, there's a whole brand new term called special sharpness that is only tied to Seregios weapons and their skill, and they didn't feel the need to actually explain that in the description. So that is what I am here to do today. We're going to look at the new skills brought into Monster Hunter Wilds with Seregios, being the Bladescale Honing, Bladescale Loading, and evading reload weapon skills, and then the Razor's Edge set bonus for the armor too. We'll get into the actual numbers behind all of this from a bunch of testing that I did, and any mechanical quirks that might change how these skills work too, how we view them, and how we should value them. I will also try to put them in the context of comparisons to other more standard meta options, though we are early days in the update, and so we are still doing our proper build crafting and such. This is more just to say whether the pieces might be worth using in proper offense-focused sets, or if it's instead just like really niche for if you want to have some fun with a bit of a different playstyle, but knowingly doing less damage. All that said, let's start with the weapons, and specifically Bladescale Honing. Across the board, the Seregios weapons in Wilds have a somewhat lower attack damage number compared to many other Rarity 8 weapons, but they come with 25% affinity, which is a really hefty chunk. 210 attack being the standard number on it, and that makes it around 15% less than what most weapons' ideal Artian roll would be, which would be 225 attack. So that is around a 7% damage decrease by itself to use a Seregios weapon. As for decoration slots, a standard Artian weapon is rocking 3 3-slot sockets, whereas the Seregios weapon gets 1 of each level, a 3-slot, a 2-slot, and a 1-slot. Generally speaking, we consider each level of a socket to be worth around 2 to 3% damage situationally, as the best use that you could get out of that is a rank of critical boost with 100% affinity, and that would be exactly 3% increase, and it scales a bit downwards from there, so we're going to count it around 2.5%, especially as you usually focus on filling the important seals first anyways. That said, if we count it like that, we can say that the Seregios weapons are around 14.5% weaker than a perfectly rolled Artian weapon before we count affinity and the skill on it. An Artian weapon has 5% affinity as a base, whereas Seregios weapons have 25% affinity. With no critical boost, 20% affinity is worth a 5% increase in damage, whereas with full critical boost, it is an 8% increase in damage. So let's call it 7% in general, as most people are going to be using at least 3 critical boost in meta offense sets. And that brings us back to around 7.5% weaker than a maxed out Artian weapon with perfect rolls. But this comes with the caveat that affinity is easier to get from equipment than raw attack is, and so even in this comparison, the Artian weapon is still technically even better than that. And so the real question is then, how good are the skills? Do it make up for this gap? Is it enough to make it better than Artian straight up? Is it at least comparable if you want to still be meta but maybe doing a little bit less damage? Or is it just undeniably worse? Starting then with the Blade Master weapon specifically, Bladescale Honing reads, narrowly evading a monster's attack while your weapon is drawn grants special sharpness. What this means is if you can use iframes to dodge a portion of an attack, not even necessarily the whole attack, as you can dodge a little bit early, have iframes for a little bit of the front of an attack, but then still technically get hit, and in that situation, the skill will still trigger. Otherwise, it works pretty much just like Adrenaline Rush. As it says in the description, this also only activates if your weapon is drawn when you do the dodge, not if you are sheathed. Generally speaking, if an action can activate Adrenaline Rush, it can also activate Bladescale Honing, which means the standard dodge roll evade for every weapon, the hop dodges for lance and gunlance as well, of course, and pretty much much any attack that has iframes built into it, except for sliding swipe on the sword and shield. I assume because it just has so many iframes that it would be way too easy to trigger the skill without too much risk. Once you activate the effect then, your sharpness bar will become sort of orangey yellow with a little bit of green on it too, with a cool pattern as well, and this represents your special sharpness. When you have special sharpness, you do not consume your units of regular weapon sharpness, and the underlying sharpness level of the weapon also does not matter, meaning regardless of whether you have white, blue, green, yellow, or red sharpness, when you activate Bladescale Honing, your weapon uses the special sharpness modifier instead. This special sharpness bar has a relatively low number of hits that is different depending on your weapon of choice, and I'd say a good way to think of it if you play the 5th generation games is sort of like Frostcraft, but instead of for sheathing your weapon, it's for evading through attacks. All of the values for how many units of sharpness you'll get for each weapon on screen here, for anyone wondering, because it is different for each one, and as you might expect, slower weapons tend to have less actual hits that you can do, and faster weapons tend to have more that you can do. So Greatsword only gets 4 units of special sharpness, whereas Dual Blades gets 6. Some interesting middle grounds are things like the Longsword or Insect Glaive, where you also only get 4 units like Greatsword, but a lot of Longsword and Insect Glaive attacks cost reduced sharpness. Like the basic overhead slash for Longsword is 1 full unit of sharpness, but Crimson Slash is half a unit for each hit, which is 1 full unit per input. So generally speaking, in this context, you can consider the units of sharpness I have displayed here to mean the number of inputs it should last for. 6 dual blade inputs can have a lot more than 6 actual hits, but of course there are also dual blade attacks that consume 1 full unit of sharpness per input, and in that case it only gets 6. As well, every weapon seems to get enough hits to do its bigger combos. 4 hits on Greatsword is enough for a full triangle combo into True Charge Slash. On Longsword it is enough for Helmbreaker and its follow-up. On Sword and Shield you get 6 hits, which is exactly enough for Perfect Rush and its follow-up as well, which you can even do after using the back hop to trigger the effect to begin with, so on and so forth for other weapons. As for the actual modifier on this effect, I compared the Seregios weapon at yellow sharpness to their special sharpness value, as yellow sharpness in Wilds is considered to be the 1 times multiplier, the baseline that we compare to. Yellow sharpness hit for 72.5, special sharpness hit for 101.5, and that is a very, very clean cut 1.4 times sharpness modifier, a 40% increase. For reference, white sharpness is a 1.32 times multiplier, so it is notably more than white sharpness. And even purple sharpness, which we don't even have in Wilds and likely won't see until the expansion, is usually a 1.39 times multiplier, which is still slightly less than special sharpness up at 1.4. This means that, on average, special sharpness hits would be around 6% more damage than a white sharpness hit if all other factors are identical, which, if you remember the numbers that we ended at earlier, means that if every single hit with a Seregios weapon had special sharpness active, this would still be around 1.5% less overall output than a perfectly rolled Artian weapon. And then come the caveats. First, in the pro column, you don't technically ever have to sharpen if you're using special sharpness with the Seregios weapon. You can have your white sharpness under it, activate special sharpness by rolling, and then you just have to reactivate the special sharpness every time you run out. You never technically have to stop and use a whetstone. Another pro, special sharpness, seems to also counter weapon bouncing like having high sharpness normally would, and so nothing that I am aware of in the game will make your weapon bounce with this special sharpness active. Now for the cons though. You simply will not have this effect active for every hit that you perform unless you are playing very suboptimally on purpose to make that happen. There will be plenty of moments where it just doesn't make sense to iframe an attack, but you still want to get some hits in, and anytime that happens, this weapon becomes worse and worse comparatively to others. That said, there are a few weapons that can get better than average uptime with this due to evasion inbuilt into their kits and their attacks, lots of attacks that have low sharpness consumption, or just things like that. And for the Blade Master weapons, the melee weapons, I would say those are mostly Longsword, Sword and Shield, and especially Dual Blade, which has a whole set of mechanics built around the Demon Boost dodge mode. And for those weapons, you can definitely use the skill quite reliably and have relatively solid uptime on the special sharpness. It's also worth noting that there was always a possibility that sharpness skills could affect this, and if you could get a 50% sharpness cost reduction from Razor Sharp, and then also have Master's Touch for the 80% chance to not consume sharpness when critting, those would theoretically significantly extend the amount of hits that you could get each time that you trigger Bladescale Honing. But after testing, even with both of these skills equipped and on and having high affinity and such, there is no difference at all, so sharpness skills do not affect the special sharpness bar. One final extra thing to touch on for Blademaster weapons is blocking. Greatsword and Charge Blade specifically consume sharpness when you guard with them, with larger attacks guarded taking more sharpness units from the weapon. When you have special sharpness and you guard an attack with those weapons, it does consume the special sharpness bar a little bit instead of your regular sharpness. And also, a bonus note, if you perfect guard, it uses way less. The specific second tier attack from the training dummy takes 3 units of special sharpness for the Greatsword, but perfect guard seems to use about only half of a single unit of this. With Greatsword, that means if you did only 1 perfect guard, you could still then get your full 4 proper hits of boosted damage too. So overall, my personal belief from all of this is that the Seregios Blademaster weapons are worse than perfectly rolled Artian weapons, but they're pretty comparable to an Artian weapon that has 220 attack. And unless you just like the niche uniqueness of it, I would say the skill itself is definitely best used on dual blades, longsword, and sword and shield. That said, we still have to talk about the ranged weapons, because they are quite different in how they work, as obviously they don't have sharpness as a mechanic to begin with. Instead, the skill for ranged Steve weapons is called Bladescale Loading. Narrowly evading a monster's attack while your weapon is drawn grants special loaded ammo or applied coatings. And that is even more vague than the Blademaster version of the skill, but this means that the activation conditions are actually exactly identical to what we talked about with the Bladescale Honing. Then that means that, especially with bow, with all the discerning dodge style gameplay that it has in Wilds, there is quite a bit of potential. That said, starting with the bow is the particularly interesting one. This bow by default has close range and sleep coating as options for it. Close range coating itself is a 1.4 times multiplier over not having a coating equipped at all. When you activate Bladescale Loading, you get 3 hits of special coating. This goes on top of your regular coatings, so you consume these first. And these are basically the same as the normal coating that you have, but they increase the damage that you do with it by 25%. And this is multiplicative with any coating bonuses themselves. This means that in total, the special close range coating from this effect is around 75% more damage than not having a coating at all. But realistically, it's only around 25% increased damage than just having normal close range coating. Regular sleep coating doesn't increase the damage of your arrows at all from not having coating, but special sleep coating does around 25% more damage than the standard shot damage does. So this is pretty consistent across the 2 coating types on the bow, and with how frequently bow wants to purposefully iframe through attacks anyways, this is actually a pretty natural combo. That said, if we count these special coatings at 100% uptime, that makes it 25% more damage just as a whole. And when using these same comparison numbers that we used for melee, this means that Seregios bow actually averages out to way more damage than a raw Artian bow, or even something like the Guardian de Shagama bow. But whether that means it will outpace an elemental bow build or not is actually entirely based around how much uptime you can keep on these special coatings. But suffice it to say, it is absolutely a viable weapon at the top end, and you will definitely be able to do some pretty fun shenanigans with this, like a solid 1000 Dragons build especially, which we'll probably put together for you soon. For bowguns, this is actually surprisingly potent, like extremely good. What it does is, regardless of whether you're using light or heavy bowgun, when you activate the Bladescale Loading effect, it gives you 3 bonus shots that you can use for either normal, pierce, or spread ammo, firing whichever one you have selected at the time. These 3 special shots do 1.4 times the amount of damage that the normal version of that shot would do. Literally 40% damage increase. Spread 3 ammo, now it does 40% more damage. Normal 3 ammo, now that does 40% more damage. There isn't much elemental build capability within these weapons, as even though they have dragon ammo, dragon is a really tough one to fully build around, and sadly doesn't get affected by the Bladescale Loading. But the fact that you can frequently get 40% increased damage on the raw ammo, while also essentially getting a free reload at the same time, is absolutely bonkers. The developers obviously realize this though, as the heavy bowgun is the only Seregios weapon that only has 200 attack instead of 210, and both of the bowguns have 20% affinity instead of 25% like the rest. But even so, this means that for raw bowgunning, if you want to use spread or normal ammo types, these are actually extremely potent, possibly even the best ones that are available, being being the equivalent of a 250 attack weapon when the skill is activated, but with 20% affinity as well, and that's just sort of straight up better than any other bowgun can do for those two ammo types. But of course, you are unlikely to have 100% uptime on it by any means. It's just more of an ideal picture of what it could look like. That said, there is one more bonus consideration here too, which is that both of the bowguns specifically also have a second weapon skill, evading reload, and this is one that is actually pretty straightforward and also very good. If you press the dodge button, you will reload one ammo. It's that simple. Nothing crazy about it, other than I should mention that it doesn't activate on burst step rapid fire for light bowgun, which I guess is fair as that would be sort of silly otherwise. All that to say, for Blade Master weapons, I don't think they're going to be overly competitive outside of maybe a couple of outliers, but for ranged weapons, they are actually quite strong. In certain playstyles, they are at least equal to the previous best options, if not even fully better than them. But we'll do more specific testing on these comparisons over the next few days as well, and let you know when we're done. This is more just for helping to understand the skills and their potential value for now. Next up, we've got the brand new set bonus on the Seregios armor, which is called Razor's Edge, and this is a set bonus built around boosting Adrenaline Rush, which is the skill that gives you bonus attack after you dodge through an attack using iframes from an evade action. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same activation conditions as both of the weapon skills we just talked about, aside from the fact that your weapon does not need to be drawn for that to happen. Meaning that the initial intention, at least, is that pairing Seregios armor with Seregios weapons should just give you a lot of power if you are dodging through attacks with iframes, rather than just avoiding attacks through positioning. That said, the 2-set bonus extends the duration of Adrenaline Rush, as well as allowing you to extend the duration further if you successfully trigger it again while it's running, meaning that you iframe another attack. Whereas without this set bonus, you can only reactivate the effect after it wears off completely. The result of this is that the base duration of Adrenaline Rush goes up from 30 seconds to 45 seconds with this set bonus, which is a massive increase. It's 50% more. But then if you successfully activate iframes again during this timer, you get to add an extra 15 seconds too, for a maximum total of 1 minute of uptime, which is literally twice as much. And it's worth mentioning that it doesn't matter at what point within that timing window you get the second dodge done, whether it is immediately or if it's in the last few seconds, it will always give you an extra 15 seconds exactly to that maximum 1 minute duration. The 4-set bonus is a bit simpler in that it also just gives you an extra attack increase if you trigger the second dodge within that timer. So if you get that extra 15 seconds of bonus time, that's when this attack boost activates as well. The actual amount is dependent on your weapon, as it is a percent bonus, not a flat one. Specifically, it is 5% of your weapon attack, not including buffs and things like that, which is nothing to scoff at. And to frame it in the current conversation, most Seregios weapons gain around 9 or 10 attack when this activates, so in an ideal scenario, this 4-set bonus would mean if you dodge 2 attacks with iframes once per minute, with full Adrenaline Rush you can keep a relatively consistent 39 bonus raw attack, whereas without the set bonus it's 30 bonus attack for 30 seconds. That being said, the 2-set bonus is really solid because it can still be 30 bonus attack for 60 seconds, and it makes it far more consistent, literally giving you double the duration on any weapon that has inbuilt dodge stuff like bow, or dual blades, or longsword that already likes Adrenaline Rush. The 4-set is a lot more investment for 5% attack. It is not consistently active, as it only starts on the second activation of the skill. As a result, I would say the 4-set bonus is probably overkill in nearly every situation, especially as most people don't really care for hitting full ranks of Adrenaline Rush anyways. But if you take a couple of the more efficient pieces, and especially if you are someone who likes evade window, you can absolutely make a very heavily iframey focused set using this 2-set and have some real power. It just likely won't be quite as strong as the more standard meta builds, but hey, it's a different playstyle, and that's always fun to have as an option, given that it's more than close enough in output to be worth using. It's worth mentioning as well, though, that there is some exception to this. For example, gunlance is a weapon that has limited benefit from affinity unless you are using specifically only weapon attacks, as shelling does not benefit from weapon affinity, but it does benefit from attack power. So a full Adrenaline Rush based set where you have bonus damage from Adrenaline Rush as well actually sort of works for gunlance a lot more than it does for the other weapons. That said, to wrap things up, Bladescale Honing is interesting but just sort of okay. It's pretty good for some weapons but not fantastic for others. Bladescale Loading is fantastic. Evading reload is great, and the armor is visually fantastic but statistically just sort of okay for most of the weapons, with the 2-set being a totally reasonable thing to aim for if you're interested in it, but the 4-set being far too much of an investment for me to be able to justify personally at the very least. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A proper deep dive into the new skills and equipment from Seregios in the second title update for Monster Hunter Wilds. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and hopefully it helps you out in getting the most enjoyment possible from all of our new toys to play with within this update. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.